All right, so, okay, I don't like this thing is saying waiting for empowered learning because that's what it did last time. And because there's a delay. Never mind, I forgot. There's an actual delay on the stream. This thing better come on.
Says it's live on my side.
I've got it now. It's delayed. Okay. Perfect. All right, I'm going to give it just a minute. See if I've got anyone else coming into this. I don't like the quality that's coming across. That's a little better. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to podcast episode number 2 for Empowered Learning USA, our Triple E podcast, which we are focusing on your private trust today. Karen and I are going to go over an article from the Hague document. I'm going to pull that up on the website so y'all can see where we're getting that from. And then feel free to reference that. It's under our free resources on our webpage. And this is going to be an interesting conversation. So we're going to have some emphasis on the public and private discussion, how government and we the people play into how you think about building your trust, and then just going and making sure we cover some of the common questions that you need to consider when we're talking about a private trust. So I'm going to hop over to our webpage. Just go to downloads. Very bottom, we've got this document. I need to make sure y'all can see that. Can you see the document, Karen, or just the page?
I cannot. I can just see the download page.
Okay, bear with me. Interesting. Okay. You gotta love technology. There we go. Now we're doing better. All right. Now can you see my screen?
I can see it. It's very small. Can we make it a little bigger?
Let's see. Well, that's interesting. It's not letting me. Oh, there it is. Never mind. I lied.
Oh, perfect.
There we go. So now I can probably
Yep.
do
little
that
bigger.
one.
Yep.
A little bit bigger.
Yeah. Is there any way? That'd be great.
Do you see it bigger now?
Nope. Just
Okay.
the same. Oh, it was taking up more of the screen. That was better.
Okay. Let's see. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go. Oh, I see it now. Okay. So it was working. It was just delayed. Okay. Is that better?
It is better.
Okay. Perfect. So we are going to work through this. Except I can't get. Alrighty. So yeah, okay, hang on. So it's not letting me scroll through the.
That's okay. Tab. I'm actually going to bring it up on my side. Perfect. So I can actually see it, and maybe those that are viewing can actually go to our website and then scroll with us as we go. I think
Perfect.
that'd be a great way to go.
Otherwise, I'll just have this up just in case so people know what we're referencing. So not a problem. All righty. So on the Hague Convention, we just wanted to make sure that we go through this document and kind of let you guys know what this outline is going to help with. And Karen, I'm going to let you jump in here and really give us the great idea of why this document is so important as we look to figure out how we should be doing a private trust.
So for me, when this document came across my education, I was like, okay, so this is actually the Hague Convention, which is a trust. And so I saw the importance of it. And so from that moment, I was like, okay, so any trust that I create should hit these specific articles and these areas, just to make sure that anything that I'm doing, there's no glaring section that's missing, right? It's international. It's great. The information is fabulous. And every single trust that I had read actually referenced this. But this document actually put it in really simple terms for me in each article so that I could either elaborate on it or keep it as short article as I wanted. And then it also really drove home that this is actually the law that I'm writing for my trust, in which it's supposed to be enforced and operated under. So I really found this to be imperative. I hope others do too, as it relates to thinking about how they're going to create it. Do they really want to create it? The different components of it. So I hope everybody learns something from this as we go along.
So yeah, and I'll add in there really quick, when you say it's the law, this is why when you're doing a common law type trust, which is what the Hague is all about, is this is going to be where you start to see some major differences between a lawful trust that you might get from an attorney and a common law trust that you can create on your own. And this is where those differences are going to be. So we want to make sure that you guys understand that the trusts, they're not all the same thing. When somebody says, have you created a trust or a will? There is not just one blanket answer to what that looks like or what it should look like.
Mm-hmm.
It really is up to you and understanding where you're having that law come from and why it's private versus the difference of going to an attorney and getting a trust drawn up through an attorney. So very different, and we're going to talk through that.
Yep. Keep in mind, this is not legal advice.
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
We're just
our
having
disclaimer.
Yeah. No legal advice, no attorneys here. We will not write this for you and stamp it. We're just going to show you guys what the importance is and why it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Alrighty.
So Karen, do we want to read this from the beginning? Right? Instead of just starting in at Article 1, start up at the top.
We can just read that top paragraph. You want me to do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Alrighty. So the state signatory to the present convention, considering that the trust, as developed in courts of equity in common law jurisdictions and adopted with some modifications in other jurisdictions, is a unique legal institution, desiring to establish common provisions on the law applicable to trusts and to deal with the most important issues concerning the recognition of trusts, have resolved to conclude a convention to this effect and have agreed upon the following provisions. So in Article 1, the convention specifies the law applicable to trusts and governs their recognition. I know when you and I were talking before, you made a really good comment about laws and regulations versus common law and who's behind each one of those. If you want to elaborate a little more on that.
Well, for me, am I seeking the laws to be governed under God, or am I seeking to be governed under man's administrative rules? Right? Because they're not the same. And which authority do I want to actually govern the trust? Right? Is it the United States codes that have been passed by Congress and have gone through the legislative process, or is it a Supreme Court case where it's just somebody's opinion and their interpretation of a law that was written, right? So understanding what laws do I want to apply to my trust is really important. And I can't make that decision with any true clarity if I don't understand that there's a clear distinction, right?
Right. Absolutely. So we know there's probably a lot of people out there like yourself, myself. I know I've dealt with trusts in my family where one person in the family had an attorney write it. One person actually wrote it themselves. There were amendments to it. There were other things that were adjusted. It was shared with the family. Some were not shared with the family. So these are things we'll address as we go through this. But all of the trusts I've ever dealt with until I did do my own were all what I consider a public trust. So it was created by an attorney. So like I said, we'll walk through them. We both have experience with dealing with the public trust that a lot of people have had.
That's the same for me. And I've had a family member that actually created a trust in that they obtained an EIN for a trust, but they never actually had a trust indenture written. And then they never funded the trust. So all of those things can actually wreak havoc in a family when family members are under the impression there is a trust, but not understanding that a trust indenture is what governs that. And then there's also the component of, have you funded it? And so a lot of different components, and I hope to touch base on some of that today. We may not get through all of this, but some of us,
right,
at least we'll be able to talk through some of it.
Yeah, we've agreed that this is a 6-page document. If we need to continue, we're going to respect that we still stick to our hour this evening. So if we don't get through it all this evening, which I don't think we will, we'll continue the conversation as we move through the articles. So Article 2, again, I'm not going to read everything word for word, but we've talked about this. A trust has the following characteristics. So what are those characteristics we really need to be looking for? And it's the legal relationships, right? So anybody can create a trust, but you need it to hold water. Like you were just saying, some people don't even have the right documents in order. You know, what does it say? What's going on with it? What am I supposed to have in it? And there's a lot of aspects to it, is usually why everybody hands it over to an attorney. But I don't know about you guys. I don't want somebody I don't know in a legal realm dictating what my personal choices are. I'd much rather understand what I need to have in all these components, and make sure that my family is taken care of and that somebody knows how to read this and how to go through it. And if they don't, I have somebody that can help them with it.
Absolutely.
So on the trust has the following characteristics. First one is the assets constitute a separate fund and are not part of the trustee's own estate. I'm going to make comment on that one.
Oh, well, the trustee is the one that takes full liability, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't want full liability. So I'd rather be an agent or a representative or a quasi part-time employee, right? I mean, we don't have employees, but trusts don't have employees, but that's what I mean, right? A worker bee, right? No liability. That's what I'm looking for. And then the assets constitute a separate fund. So let's say you, Tara, I've created a trust. Let's say you are my trustee or my agent for my trust. We cannot commingle your ownership assets into my trust, right? That's what we're really talking about here. Assets constitute a separate fund, which means the assets in the trust are for the benefit of the beneficiary and cannot be commingled with the trustee's own estate. So you can't put your car or your house or your $50 into the trust that I create. That's what this is really referencing to me, keeping it very separate. This way we can avoid any commingling of any assets, right?
Absolutely. And then second one, title to the trust assets stand in the name of the trustee or in the name of another person on behalf of the trustee.
Well, how do you think this would look in your trust?
You're asking me personally?
Well, or just a scenario, right?
Okay.
What could this look like? So let's say you have a title to you own your own car. Let's say, for example, that's the scenario. So the title to the trust asset, the title, right, is one thing. The car is a different thing, right? So in the title to the trust assets, does the title to the car, whose name is that in? Is that in your name or is that in the trust name? Right?
Right.
Or is it in somebody else's name? Right? Ideally, the trustee can't own the car that's for the beneficiary of the trust, right? So the car would not be in the trustee's name, but the car title might be in the trust name, right? Because the trust owns it, right?
Right.
And then the car would be used by the beneficiary, right?
Right. So just to clarify to everybody too, we're just going to do a general overview of private trust, and we actually have a course coming out that's going to give you more detail of what is the definition of a trustee, what is the definition of beneficiaries. It's going to give you some documentation and really walk you through how to do this. And if you, of course, if you need extra assistance, we're always available. But today we're just going to go through the conversation of hearing what this sounds like. Some people may hear this for the first time. Some people may not have heard specific pieces, but I will always, since we have this document on the website, please go in, feel free to download this document, print it, and start looking up the definitions of these words like trustee and beneficiary so that you are prepared to kind of understand what all of those mean, because we have some common knowledge, right? Like somebody can say to me, well, do you know what this is? And I'll be like, oh, heck yeah, I know what that is. But then they're going to be like, well, wait a minute, you're missing pieces to that. So don't just assume you know what a trustee is. Don't just assume you know what a beneficiary is because somebody asked you on a life insurance policy who you wanted to take over the policy when you died. You really need to kind of think through what this looks like, because someone's going to need your instruction and you're going to really need to understand those basics so that you know what that instruction should look like.
Right.
So then the third one, the trustee has the power and the duty in respect of which he is accountable to manage, employ, or dispose of the assets in accordance with the terms of the trust and the special duties imposed upon him by law. So go ahead and make some comments on the trustee part, because we know how the duties of the trustee are super important.
Well, the trustee is the one that manages the assets for the benefit of the beneficiary, right? So let's say the beneficiary needs to purchase an automobile. Well, the trustee is the one that looks at, well, does the beneficiary need a 10th car in the same year? Probably not. But does the beneficiary need their first new car? Maybe. It's absolutely entirely possible. So the trustee would help facilitate that for the beneficiary. Then when the automobile is obtained, the title to that would go into the trust. The trustee would then be the one authenticating the title for the automobile that's in the trust. The automobile then gets to be utilized by the beneficiary under whatever stipulations there are in the trust, right? So the trustee or the agent is really the facilitator on behalf of that beneficiary, whoever that is, right? Now, beneficiaries can be individuals, they can be a business under the trust, they could be a trust within a trust. So it really depends on how your document is actually written as to who the beneficiary actually is.
Right. All right. So on to Article 3. The convention applies only to trusts created voluntarily and evidenced in writing. It's pretty self-explanatory.
That is correct. However, there is also unwritten implied trust, right? So it's important to know that, right? Like
Yep.
we have We have an implied trust if we have a spouse or a partner and we say, hey, here's my keys. I need you to go do this and run this errand. We have an implied trust that that activity is going to happen, but we don't necessarily have a written contract saying, I give my partner or my spouse permission to go to the store, right? So written is hugely important. They can all be changed and updated, but trusts are not always written. So it's important to recognize that.
And what is the purpose of them putting in there that the trust to be created voluntarily?
That means it's void of coercion, right? No one held my feet to the fire and forced me to write a trust, right?
Yep.
And that's
why I did this. Yeah.
That's why it's voluntary. You know,
Yeah.
those phrases under threat, duress, and fear of coercion come into play,
Yeah.
right? We
And
want
I am of sound mind.
right? Yeah,
Yep.
there's a reason it's voluntary because you
Yep.
want it to be, right? So that's
Love
funny.
it. Yep. So Article 4, the convention does not apply to preliminary issues relating to the validity of wills or of other acts by virtue which assets are transferred to the trustee.
I'll
Explain that
defer.
one.
I'll defer. No, I was going to defer this one to you.
So, I mean, obviously difference between wills and trusts. You know, a will is more of, you know, your wishes, and the trust itself is more of a official document that actually has a lot more components to it. You know, a will is good if you've got nothing. A trust is best because it really gives the trustee full instructions on how you would like them to represent your estate. So I think it's super important for people to understand too, and we'll talk a little bit in the course when we talk about powers of attorney and things like that. There's really a lot of components of a trust because you've got to think of everything. You almost, you know, I think the hardest part about a trust is you've got to walk yourself through your death and figure out what's going to happen when you're gone. You know, how are people going to act? What do you need to make sure you have? I mean, like for me, if I don't share with somebody everything that I have done, no one in my household would have any clue what I've done because I take care of everything. So if you're one of those people that takes care of everything, a trust is super important because they can crack this open and go, oh, there's a lot of information in here. And at least there's instruction to say who's responsible for what kind of help can we get if we need to. And it really, you know, just it's way more impactful and more detailed than a will. And again, getting into what supersedes what really goes on your power of attorney and how you write your trust. So, you know, in your trust, you can state the trust supersedes any other documents that you've had out previously. So things like that.
I see the will as something that would get executed once I'm dead, which is terrible, right? And like I've given only forethought to what will happen when I'm gone, and here's the final disbursement to everything, right? And then I see my trust as something that is living with me that then benefits who or what I determine is going to move forward, right? While I'm still alive. And then when I'm dead, then what can happen with the trust is that can still go on in perpetuity, right? Depending on how it's written, which then means my legacy can live on, right? Where a will is like, this is final, this is what needs to be closed out, and then my legacy ends, right? And so it really is looking at the future generations and how do I want to be able to impact them and society forever, right? That's how I see them significantly different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then Article 5 is just a statement. The convention does not apply to the extent that the law specified by Chapter 2, which is down below, titled Applicable Law, does not provide for trusts or the category of trusts involved. So I'm assuming that that's talking about making sure that you have a lawful trust put together, whether it's common law, public law, whatever, however you see that, again, understanding the
Mhm.
differences between each and making sure that you have followed the applicable law and making sure your trust is valid. Because you can create a trust doesn't mean it's valid.
Correct.
Alrighty, so Article 6, trust shall be governed by the law chosen by the settlor. The choice must be express or be implied in the terms of the instrument creating or the writing evidencing the trust, interpreted if necessary in the light of the circumstances of the case. Where the law chosen under the previous paragraph does not provide for trust or the category of trust involved, the choice shall not be effective and the law specified in Article 7 shall apply. So let's talk a little bit about express and implied, because you touched on an implied trust a little bit ago.
So, well, let's go back a little bit. Who's the settlor? Who is that? Do we know what that means? Right? So that's a great word to be looking up, going, wait a minute, if it's going to be governed by the law chosen by the settlor, isn't the settlor the same as the grantor? And what was the intention of the grantor, right? So we really need to understand the language. So it's really important to be looking up at that. Now, the choice must be express or be implied. Okay, so I have seen trusts that actually have written in it that they are wanting a religious document to actually govern it, God's law, the Bible, that kind of thing. I've also seen trusts where people have actually put in their trust documents spiritual bylaws. And I've seen the spiritual bylaws be the trustee or the agent will abide by the 10 commandments, or they will abide by these spiritual principles. And I've actually seen those put in there. Now, did the settlor or the grantor express that to their trustee? Maybe, maybe not. But for this individual, they actually put it into their trust documents, which I think is hugely important, right? Because when we put it in writing, if the trustee or the agent fails their duty to uphold those spiritual bylaws, then the beneficiaries actually have the authority to terminate the trustee. And so if it's just that the settlor spoke it to the trustee, then the beneficiaries really have no standing to say, hey, look, you're violating your duty according to the trust indenture. So that's where the express and the implied really vary in the ability to enforce it, right?
Right. Absolutely. And like I said, well, as we get through our courses and things too, it's going to really dive into, what's the correct one for you. There's not just one way to do this. It's, people are going to ask irrevocable versus revocable, express, how do we do each of these? And we'll go into more detail with that as we move through the course. Since this referenced Article 7, we'll go into Article 7 is where no applicable law has been chosen, a trust shall be governed by the law with which it is most closely connected. In ascertaining the law with which a trust is most closely connected, reference shall be made in particular to the place of administration of the trust designed by the settlor, the situs of the assets of the trust, the place of residence or business of the trustee, and the objects of the trust and the places where they are to be fulfilled. So let's go through each one of those.
Oh, goodness. Okay. The place and administration of the trust designated by the settlor. Okay. So if I'm the grantor, where's the place of administration? Am I within the 10 square miles of the District of Columbia, or am I outside it? Has that been written or implied? Right. So that I think is huge right there. Okay. The situs of the assets of the trust. Okay. So are we talking about hard assets? So like I'm talking about silver, gold, or precious metals and that kind of thing. Okay. Are we talking about that? Or are we talking about a residence? Or are we talking about the land and soil? So really, what is the asset in the trust, right? Are we talking about a vehicle that has been registered with the state, or are we talking about a private owned automobile that's not registered for the state? So that
I'm going to have you pause on this one for just a second so I can let everybody know the importance of the definitions and the word situs.
Okay.
So definition of situs, just in dictionary, Yahoo, and nothing special, no Black's Law, anything, real simple. Place to which, for purposes of legal jurisdiction or taxation, a property belongs. So
Correct.
when we start diving into this, that legal jurisdiction and taxation is going to be huge for how you decide to set up your trust and what you really want to have happen. So I just want to make sure we define
Yes.
situs.
Right. So if you're talking resident is in your trust, is that taxable? Right? If it's in the 10 square miles of DC, it's taxable if it's a resident. If it's not a residence and you are now talking about meets and bounds, that's outside the 10 square miles of the District of Columbia. If you're talking about an automobile that's an asset of the trust, is it registered? Well, then it's taxable under the situs. If it's an automobile that's not registered with the state, then it's not taxable and therefore it's outside. So really, it really matters where your tax liability and status is. Now, I'm not advocating for tax evasion at all. I am not advocating for that. What I am advocating for, and a lot of education needs to happen about, is tax avoidance. There is nothing illegal about tax avoidance. There is a whole lot illegal when you're talking about tax evasion. I don't condone that, just for the record.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, the place of residence or business of the trustee. Where's the trustee located? Is the trustee located in the 10 square miles of the District of Columbia? And are they conducting your trust business within that jurisdiction, or are they not? So that's your trustee would want to be on the same knowledge base as you. If your trustee is thinking statutory and 10 square miles of the District of Columbia by default because they don't know of another option, then they might not be the best trustee depending on what your goals of your trust are. And then the objects of the trust and the place where they are to be fulfilled is also important, but you can't really get to that until you answer the preceding categories. So
absolutely. Alrighty, so Article 8, the law specified by Article 6 or 7 shall govern the validity, of the trust, its construction, its effects, and the administration of the trust. In particular, that law shall govern, and I'll go through these one by one instead of reading them all through because it's longer. The appointment, resignation, and removal of trustees, the capacity to act as a trustee, and the devolution of the office of trustee. So you had referenced that before, that there is authority within the trust to remove a trustee if they're not acting in the best interest.
correct. That's absolutely correct.
Perfect.
The right,
and then
correct. Go ahead. Nope, I'll let you go.
Alrighty, the rights and duties of trustees amongst themselves. So some people can have more than one trustee. Rights of trustees to delegate in whole or in part the discharge of their duties or exercise of their powers. Now, in the trust, you can let your trustee know it's okay that if they need advice, where, who they can hire, what they can do. So that's all part of the delegation of a trustee. Anything you want to add there?
No, I think that's great. I think it's important to do that because no trustee is going to have all of the answers, and they're going to need to seek that outside counsel, regardless of who it is, right? They're going to need to be able to bring people on, and it's important to have that be that authority to be delegated to them. It's hugely important.
Next one, the power of trustees to administer or to dispose of trust assets, to create security interest in the trust assets, or to acquire new assets. I'll let you elaborate on that one.
That's the trustee ability to complete their fiduciary duties, right? We talk about these commercial contracts that we have, let's say at the utility company or phone company or your mortgage company. They're in a trustee fiduciary role. Well, so is your trustee over your trust. That is their purpose. And they need to be able to administer that appropriately.
Yep. And then same, the powers of investment of trustees
Mhm.
follows the same conversation. Restrictions upon the duration of the trust and upon the power to accumulate the income of the trust. So again, that's just setting your rules and your instructions inside the trust that says these are things that you need to think about.
Mhm.
Relationship between the trustees and beneficiaries, including the personal liability of the trustees to the beneficiaries. It's super important that that relationship be established early on so that you kind of know, and especially following the wishes of the settlor or grantor and how they're writing this. Don't just throw a trustee in there and hope they figure out who those beneficiaries are through the process.
Well, there's that, and the other thing that really goes along with this is who is the trustee, and then who is the beneficiary. So if I have, and I don't have this, but I'm just going to use this phrase. If I have a dirtbag child and I really don't trust them, I don't believe that their ethics and morals and values align with mine or with what I want the trust to be doing, then why would I want to hire or obtain this dirtbag child to be the trustee, right? That's not in the best interest of the beneficiary or the trust. And so then the other thing becomes is what kind of caveats do I have in there if I've got potential beneficiaries that are going to bicker? If I'm leaving assets that are separate in content and then separate in value to two different beneficiaries, that might cause animosity between the two. So, are you putting into your trust a caveat? Now, I have seen in trusts written actually in the document itself. Should any beneficiary dispute or argue with any aspect of the trust, they are to never benefit from any trust asset. I've actually seen that language in a trust. And the grantor did that so that specifically they could kibosh any bickering or arguing between the beneficiaries at all ever. Like if you
Which,
want to quibble, don't take it to the trustee because man, you don't get anything,
and,
right?
and how many people right now are going, oh my gosh, that's awesome, right?
Right.
You
Because
just don't. Hey, I've been involved in situations where you think everybody's good to go, it's all written, it's all good, and then it changes the second you pass. Like you have no idea how people navigate things when people are talking to other people in their ear. It's just such a, you don't know what it feels like till you're in it, and forward like, oh, they wanted us to do this and this and this, and others sat my family down and said, hey, here's what's in here, let's talk about this, let me know if you have any questions. So we really knew ahead of time. We were like, oh my gosh, he's really got this together. And then afterwards we find that the bank's going to give us grief because we don't have every little thing. And I remember one of my family members going, well, I have their ashes in the trunk, do you need me to prove anything else? I mean, so you don't want to get into that kind of stuff. You want to
mm-mm.
be able to think of everything and be able to have that trustee be able to defend it. And there's just stuff you don't think about, there's just things you really don't think about. And that's why we're trying to walk through this with you guys, because not only have we been there, but we've also created our own private trusts. I mean, between Karen and I, we both have multiple. So we've gotten really good at, if we didn't do it the first time, we caught it, a couple times in and said, okay, we want to adjust everything to have the same language. So it's coming from people who have spent some time going through this stuff and making sure we've covered everything we could possibly think of.
Correct. And I in one of the trusts I chose not to say things like this individual X only gets this because of these reasons. I have
Right.
chosen to stay completely out of that arena. And what
Right.
I've instead chosen to do is to say, um, and I'm paraphrasing, bring any conflict to the table in regards to trust distribution, they will fail, or not fail, they will cease to be able to benefit from any trust asset. So by
Right.
phrasing it that way, that means no monetary. That means you can't drive a car. That means you couldn't live in a house. That means you couldn't take a sailboat. You couldn't even take a dog for an overnight at your house. Like you
So,
get
so
no benefit of anything.
isn't that the power of speaking to them from beyond the grave?
That's
I
seriously,
think it's awesome
seriously. Like do
because they
that
just
because
heard your voice and went, "Oh God, she's still telling me that if I don't behave, I'm not going to get things."
well, but it's don't bicker. We
Yep.
can be as lenient as we want in these trusts, right? Like we put the assets in there and then we say as long as you're the beneficiary, you can benefit from all of this. But at the moment any bickering starts, nope, you're done. Right?
Yep. Yep.
Be grateful
Love
and
it.
gracious, right?
Love it.
Okay.
Love it.
So
Alrighty.
then
So
then
go
we
ahead.
get into what? Number H.
Yes.
So the variation or termination of the trust. A lot of people want their trust to go on for perpetuity, which, yes, that would be ideal. What I'm seeing a lot of people do, and this is what I've done, is that I have said the trust is good for 25 years, at which point the trustees can reevaluate the benefit of the trust and then they can then reinstate it for another 25 years. So that's not saying it's 99 years long trust. No, what I'm saying is at the end of every 25 years, it can be reassessed. But the trust indenture also states that it's to go on for perpetuity. So that 25 benchmark is just a reassessment of are we going to continue for another 25 years? Yes, we have a trustee meeting. We go through all the meeting minutes and we say yes, and then it goes for another 25 years and then we have another one. Now, there's plenty of trustee meetings that happen in between that, but I'm just saying that that's the one that would determine that because that's the parameter that they've put in it for the renewal of it. Now,
Well,
you can at any given point terminate a trust. You just have your meeting, you do your meeting minutes, the trustee and the beneficiaries get together and it's done. You can just straight up dissolve it. And then in the dissolving part of it, you would then disperse the assets and bring the value back to zero. Right.
right. Well, and you bring up a good point because we're talking about the length of how we're doing these trusts and revisiting and all of these things and the relationships that are going on and the distribution of all these assets. I think that's the biggest difference I'm seeing also in back of our conversation about the wills is a will. I think people put it together and put it on a shelf and they kind of forget about it, right? It's just, oh, I want this, this, and this, and I've thought about all my valuable things. The beautiful part about a trust is it's living, breathing. It's still, you can change it, you can update it, you have your meeting minutes, you still have control of these things. And as assets come and go, you're documenting all of these things. And it really is like running an internal business when you have a trust. So it's not something to be intimidated by, but it's really beneficial to see how this document lives and breathes with you up until the point somebody needs to take it over and do what you've asked them to do.
Yeah, I agree.
All righty. And then last one, the duty of trustees to account for their administration. Now, my take on part of this comment is some trustees are compensated, just depends on if you hire an outside trustee, if you've got somebody else, that you've thought of. Maybe, when you talk about trustees can be brought on and fired and other things. There can also be agreements that somebody is a temporary trustee until you can train somebody else up in that role to help with these things. So the trustee is flexible just as much as the trust is flexible, and the grantor or the settlor actually determines what all of that looks like while they're still around so that they can, compensate somebody if they choose to. But that's kind of where their administrative process comes into play as the trustee is they're really the ones defending that trust and making sure that they are the admin of the trust, keeping track of our meetings, our minutes, what's going on, what do we need to do, what still has to be documented, and making sure that it's all up to speed so that when a trustee does need to do something with the trust, they're very well versed on it and it hasn't been 10 years since they looked at it.
Yep. Yep.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, I was thinking that people really need to kind of think outside the box on some of this stuff, right? Like we talk about all the various hats that we wear. Well, with the various hats that we wear, that also may bring various autographs that we have, right? And so I was thinking about that and really thinking outside the box for that. Right. And then I was thinking outside the box as far as if you have somebody that's like minded, that's willing to be a trustee, but they lack a little bit of the knowledge, how can you then bring them on almost in a quasi on the job training until they can get educated enough to that they could actually do it and then create their own under some supervision, and then they can help you get what you need as the grantor to your trust, but they're in the capacity of trustee and you're mentoring them. So I was just thinking about those kind of aspects in how it's okay to think outside the box. We are not
Right.
so pigeonholed when it comes to writing our trust that we can't stretch the boundaries of it, because it truly is each of our own, and it is as large or as small as we can imagine it. So
Yep.
that's what I wanted to add to that.
Absolutely. So I'm going to get through 9 and 10, and I think the good stopping point for next time will be chapter 3 on the recognition. This still goes into a little bit of the laws. So Article 9, in applying this chapter, a severable aspect of the trust, particularly matters of administration, may be governed by a different law. Anything to add on there?
Well, the different laws really then would come into play as far, let's say that you as a trustee are in the de jure, right? It's a private trust. Okay. But let's say you've got a municipality that's trying to breach the trust, right? What laws are governing that? Right? What laws are governing the trust, and then what laws govern the municipality, and how can you hold the municipality accountable to the laws that govern them, right? Because the trust laws will not govern the municipality, but we need them to stay within their own arena, right? So
And
that's
yeah,
what comes to mind for this.
yep. And something important with that as well is you cannot think that if something's, so you talk about a municipality or somebody else coming in and challenging the trust, you got to make sure all this stuff is in the trust before that happens. There is no, oh gosh, I need to put it in there kind of thing. So this is where
Correct.
you really need to do your due diligence as you're gathering your trust documents.
Correct.
Alrighty, Article 10, the law applicable to the validity of the trust shall determine whether that law or the law governing a severable aspect of the trust may be replaced by another law. Again, I think that goes back to what you were talking about before, is understanding how you're writing this document and what has authority over what.
Well, sure, because this really boils down to if I'm writing a statutory trust and the statutes are man-made and they decide in January one law applies, but in June they don't like it and they change that law. Now that new law in June now applies to your statutory trust, right?
Yep.
Which then means there's no consistency. Nothing is cemented because somebody is always changing it. And therefore my trust is not 6 months down the road is not really standing as I had originally intended it. So those governing laws are hugely important.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll pause on the Hague document, but I want to go over, I've got some questions here coming in that I think are going to be important to talk about in our last 13 minutes that we've got.
Let's have them.
Yeah. Is there a restriction on somebody that you should stay away from, or like family members, I'm assuming, things like that? Is there a protocol for picking a trustee?
Well, I haven't seen any protocols, but here's what common sense says to me. If I want my daughter Susan to be a beneficiary, I would not also want Susan to be a trustee of the same thing she's supposed to be benefiting from. So those are things that I would take into consideration. Do I want Susan to be a beneficiary? Absolutely. Great. Have her be a beneficiary. Would I want Peter to be a trustee? Sure, Peter could be a trustee, but how about we make Peter a trustee if Susan is the beneficiary? How about we make Susan the trustee if Peter is the beneficiary? So you really would want to offset the trustee and beneficiary role, right? That's my perspective. I've done that on all of the trusts that I've set up. The trustee is not the same as the grantor, and the grantor is not the same as the beneficiary. So I have actually put different entities in different roles to avoid that confusion. Are you a trustee and the grantor and the beneficiary? So I've really purposefully separated that. I think it's
Absolutely.
a good idea. I think it's a good practice.
Absolutely. Next question. What type of trust is best for my situation?
Oh, well, that depends on the situation, right?
Yes,
So,
it does.
Okay, so I think at this point, it's safe to say that we all know we have a trust. Okay. It's our NLegis or your straw man or your government entity or whatever you choose to call it. However, we did not create that. Somebody else created that on our behalf. And I am the agent. I'm not a trustee. I don't want the liability. So I'm the agent for the living, breathing being of that government entity. So that is a trust already. That happens to be a statutory one, right? Okay. So then let's talk about private trust. So what kind of things would I put in a private trust? Well, that depends on what you have, right? Is it difficult to get a bank account for a private trust? Well, I've heard both sides of the coin on that. Some say yes, some say no. Okay, well, do you even want a bank account for a private trust? Some say yes, some say no. So that depends on what you're talking about. Do people have 3 cars? Let's say you've got a 3-car family. Do people have all 3 cars in one trust? Well, I wouldn't think that that would be something I would want to do, because if one car got into an accident, I wouldn't want all 3 cars to be in that same trust. So does each car have its own trust? Well, from my perspective, that would be a great benefit to have. Okay. Does each one of those trusts have to have an EIN number? No. No, they're private. They don't need an EIN number. So it really is difficult to say which trust is best for my circumstances, because everyone's circumstances are so different.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, next question. How long should it take me to set up a trust?
Okay, so what comes to mind is, how long do you want it to take?
Right.
Right? So you can do it as quickly or as long and drawn out as you want to. There's a lot of great stuff out there. There's a lot of great resources out there. So it really is up to the individual. That's my take.
Absolutely. And then one of the things we'll talk about going down the line too is all the, we won't get into that tonight, is we'll get into all the pieces of what are the documents you should have in a trust, right? Like, what holds everybody accountable? What do we need to have in there? If I am doing banking, what are they going to ask me for? What are the things I need to have? Like you said, EIN, no EIN, what is, how does that work? Social versus EIN, and how does that work when you're talking about all of these things? And then what about the difference between revocable and irrevocable when it comes to recommendations? Because I know some people hear different things on what's better.
Well, what's your preference?
So I personally, irrevocable, solidifies a lot of things and keeps things tight and neat, but it does, just because it's irrevocable does not mean you can't update things and do what you need to in the meeting minutes. I think revocable is a little looser in my opinion. And the irrevocable, sometimes when you're dealing with certain situations, they require you to have irrevocable. So I've always gone with the irrevocable on my end, just because when I first did it, I thought, oh my gosh, that just means you can't ever touch it again. And that's not what it means. So as soon as I learned, like, okay, there's just ways I have to do this that makes it lawful inside of my trust, so that my trust is valid. But it doesn't mean you can't ever touch it again. And that was a misconception I had when I was first doing them.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought irrevocable meant it can never be modified. And so when I read that, I was like, I don't know, I'm too new at this. I'm scared. What if I do it wrong? What if I jack it up? I'm going to need to be able to change it. And I thought that irrevocable meant I could never. And that is not the case. And then I thought revocable is what I want, until I learned that revocable means most people can change it at any given point. And I went, I don't want that either. So I'm like, okay, so let's go back and revisit the irrevocable. This was my thought process. Revocable is out because I didn't want an outside entity changing a trust at any given point. Okay. And keeping in mind that vendors at my cell phone company, my utility company, all of that, if I give them a revocable trust, then that means that they may or may not be able to change it at any given point, depending on their ability to engage in nefarious activities, right? Like, I'm trying to be careful here. And so the irrevocable part means that I write it, it's irrevocable unless the beneficiaries and the trustees get together and in the meeting minutes, there's a vote and they agree, and then it can be changed and it can be amended in the meeting minutes, which I think is a much healthier, safer way to go about doing this. And I have chosen irrevocable as well, because I like the security in knowing that. But it really, truly is an individual decision.
Absolutely. And then just one last question. What I think this is something, I'm going to rephrase this one, and I'm going to kind of put it back to just a general question to others. Really asking yourself, what are the primary goals for your trust, right? Before you even sit down and you start putting all this together and you start figuring out that, because there's a lot of people too that don't think they have anything to put into a trust. And you would be surprised if you continue to listen to us and go on our website, you're going to realize that you have assets you didn't think were assets. So I think really sitting down and going, like, what are my goals? If my goals are to grow the trust, are my goals to just make sure there's something for the beneficiaries to be able to live off of? Like, you really got to understand what your goals are based for your situation, because that's going to be extremely different for everybody involved. And I think you and I have talked about this a lot in the past, is that's really the starting point of any trust, is really ask yourself, what are the primary goals of even creating this trust? Why do I want to do it?
Yeah, exactly. So when I started this about 5 years ago, I knew I had areas of knowledge that I needed to learn. But here I am 5 years down this road, and I have areas I didn't even know I had areas 5 years ago. And so I'm just like, what? Here's another asset. Here's another asset. Oh my gosh, here's another one. Okay, wait a minute. I can only deal with one at a time. So that's what I'm doing. But in the meantime, I am gaining knowledge. I'm gaining understanding. I'm understanding what trust evidence is. I'm understanding what trust assets are. I'm understanding so many aspects of this that it really, truly is, what is the goal of the trust? That's really what it boils down to. All the rest of it comes as I defend and define what is the goal of the trust. And go
ahead.
I was going to say, and for me, the goal of the trust is to grow in perpetuity, for all of my heirs and assigns. That's it. It's really that simple. So everything I do really comes back to, how is this growing in asset and value? And is this going to be beneficial in perpetuity for my heirs and assigns? If the answer is yes to both of those, then I can say, okay, this is a trust action that I will take. If it doesn't meet those two, I don't do it, because now it's deterring me from growing the trust and growing the assets in it, which I can't afford to do. It's like that's got to go. That's a waste, right?
And based on that prior comment of like, how long does it take to do this? Well, overthinking it'll take you forever. It could take you years to get this done. So yeah, simplifying it, and that's really what we're trying to help everybody do, is simplify the process. It's a lot of thinking and a lot of decision making, but when it gets down to actually putting it together, that's the easier part. It's determining, what all is there, how do you need to categorize it, how do you need to catalog it in the trust, who's responsible, it's all the decisions that come in the about what you didn't know, and learning along the way, and I immediately pictured like going to school, right? And I'm going to reference when I was in school, not today's kids, because that might screw up what I'm about to say. So, K through 5, we're like, okay, we're good. I don't need this anymore, right? I'm good. It's K through, and then you're like, oh, there's middle school, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Oh goodness. Okay. And then, oh my gosh, I have high school. I still have 4 more years to go. But if you look back and you go, each of those chunks had a purpose, right? And you haven't stopped learning after high school, even if you chose not to continue education in the formal sense. You really should continue education in the common sense, because that's really what's going to pull us through being able to control our own destiny, right? From the trust to other things we talk about with our Right to Travel course. We've got some contract courses coming up. We have some other really cool podcasts coming up, which as a matter of fact, since it is 7:00 on the hour, I'm going to mention our next podcast next week is going to be The Principal and the Agent, where we're going to talk about what do each of those mean.
We're going to be talking about the Chapter 3 recognition of the Hague next week.
True. That is true. I'm sorry. So stay tuned for The Principal and the Agent. So that's coming probably in December, because we're only into 10 of, I forget how many is in that Hague document. So yes, thank you for the correction on that. I'm excited to get through all the education. So I know that people are out there just trying to piece it together. Again, please help us out and subscribe to our channel. Check out our Facebook, our webpage. Anything that we can do to help you guys. We have 15-minute consults available that are free if you have general questions or you just need some pointing in the right direction. And then, of course, if there's anything else we can help you out there, we will do as well. So I will sign us off for today on November the 20th. And we will do one more again on the Hague before Thanksgiving hits. And then we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Bye, everybody.